Let's pray together. Our Father in heaven, we pray for your wisdom today as we consider these important matters. Please bless us and help us to understand these things with precision and great understanding. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Well, today we turn to a different kind of topic where previously we've been dealing with things that are very much in the core of our agreements, like murdering people, bad. Stealing from people, bad, right? These are things that we all agree about. And what we were doing as we looked at Aquinas' arguments was not so much trying to figure out a controversial position, but to understand the positions that we hold better. But today we turn to a topic which is among the most controversial in history. And it's probably one that has some meaning for you politically today. So today we're turning to two related questions in Aquinas, one on unjust sales. And the question on unjust sales, it's not aimed exclusively at the question that follows, but it sets up the question which follows. So the first question on unjust sales is, putting aside issues of fraud, where you lie to somebody, which is obviously wrong, where you get someone to pay you money for something by lying. I say the horse is healthy, and I know the horse is sick and about to die, and I convince someone to pay me a lot of money for a horse that's about to die. That's obviously fraud. It's obviously wrong. But the question now is, suppose that I sell someone a horse for $100, and we both know the horse is only worth $50. There's no fraud. We both know it. The horse is worth $50, but I sell it for $100. Is that unjust? And is that wrong? Is there a measure by which if I get more than something is worth, that I have committed an injustice? And Aquinas says, yes, definitely, as we'll see. And then he proceeds to the next question, which is, what if I sell someone an amount of money? And he's thinking of here of a loan, if I give someone a loan, and I ask for more than the money is worth. So if you get the first question, if I sell a horse for more than it's worth, if you think, oh, that could be unjust, Aquinas gives a reason why he thinks that unjust. And then he turns to the question, what if I sell money? I give you a loan, and I want more for the money than it's worth. Money is worth the amount of money. I'm going to loan you $1 million. How much is the $1 million worth? $1 million. And I ask for a price which is greater than $1 million. And we call that price, today we would call it interest, but in Aquinas' day, they would call it usury. The amount over the price of the money they would call usury. And Aquinas says, what you're doing in the first case, selling a horse for more than it's worth, is what you're doing in the second case when you ask for more money than the money is worth. Now, he's willing to say there are a few legitimate things that you could add to the price to pay for the damage you have. So, for example, if you have to process the fee for the loan, you could do a fee equivalent to the amount of money you spent processing the loan. But he thinks beyond that, it's unjust. Now, I say this is a hugely controversial question because we live in a world where usury, the taking of interest on loans, is a fundamental part of our economies. It is fundamental to the way our economies work. And there are many people who think that the resulting debt that people suffer under, where people borrow a lot of money and then have a hard time paying back the original plus the interest, has very, very, very bad social consequences. If you're taking out student loans right now, you will feel some of those social consequences. In the United States, student loans are a very, very big issue because the United States government makes it very, very easy for students to get almost unlimited amounts of money for student debt. And many times students end up pursuing degrees, not in law. Law is okay. But they pursue degrees in underwater basket weaving They pursue degrees. That's a joke. They don't do that. But they pursue degrees. Professor Davis says yes, they do. And they actually, if you study underwater basket weaving, at least you know how to make a basket underwater. Many people today pursue degrees in things that give them no skills at all. And these people then have very large amounts of debt and no way to pay for them. And there are large social questions about whether this is right or wrong. But not only people taking out loans for degrees. We had a housing crisis in the United States. Banks, for reasons of social justice often, were encouraged to give people who did not have the means to pay back loans in order to buy houses and other things, and then they were unable to pay back the loans. This caused a gigantic crash in our financial system and market, and the US government ended up bailing out the people who had provided these loans. The banks profited, the home builders profited, but the American taxpayers were left picking up a large amount of money, trillions of dollars worth of money. So loans and the kind of social consequences that come from being able to sell money have a huge effect on the world. Another institution in the United States that's very troubling, we have a practice called payday loans. Payday loans. A payday loan is called that because before my payday, suppose my child gets sick and I need to pay for medical treatment, and I don't get paid for a week and I have no money. So I take my last pay stub into the payday loan and I give them the stub. And they say, okay, next week you're going to be paid $500. We will give you a loan today for 2/3 of that amount with no questions asked, but you have to pay us a very large fee. And if you don't pay back the loan, there's going to be a very, very high interest rate. Annually, these interest rates can reach 200, 300, 400, 500% annually. And so people who take these payday loans end up often buried beneath debt without any means of paying it off. This is legal in the United States, despite the fact that until quite recently, in the 1970s, all the states in the United States had very strong limitations on usury. 5, 8, 12% was the maximum that could be charged in interest annually in most states. But in early 1970s, let's say, the United States Supreme Court said that it was unconstitutional for a state to prevent out-of-state bankers from offering loans that were of higher interest rate than were legal in the state. If it was legal in the foreign state, it had to be allowed in the given state. So 2 states, it was Delaware and South Dakota, I believe, got rid of their laws on usury so that they could attract banks who then offered credit cards throughout the country, offering very high interest rates. And the Supreme Court said you had to allow them to do that. And so it led to the destruction of strong usury laws in the United States and the explosion. This happened about the same time that Starbucks started in the United States. Starbucks is usually considered a miracle of growth. In the United States, like in Korea, everywhere you look, there's a Starbucks. There's actually a Starbucks right under here. It's very small, but you can buy very small coffees right under here. Anywhere you look, there's a Starbucks. The growth rate of payday loan institutions in the United States grew faster than Starbucks. There are more payday loan operations in the United States than Starbucks. Explosive growth over the same period of time. So many people historically have looked to people who offer these kind of loans and thought this was very unjust, and they've looked at the effect of this kind of lending and the power of financial institutions and thought, is my introduction taking too long? I'm trying to motivate what's going to follow. Is that okay? Can I keep going? Okay, I'll keep going. They've looked at this and thought a very big problem. Now, as the opening slide indicates, some of the ways that people try to respond to social problems is politically. That is to say, people look at the problems of finance in the world and think what we need is a strong political response. We need the government to take over. We need the government to operate banks, or we need the governments to regulate or something like this for political reasons. And this is, for example, the debates between socialism or capitalism or these kinds of things. But if Aquinas is right about these things, there would be massive changes to our current order that would get rid of most of the ways that banks, financial systems work in the world today, not for political reasons, not because it's politically the best thing to do, but because it's wrong. There is no right to do it. It would be done not on the basis of what kind of society we want to shape through power, but judges should refuse to enforce contracts for usury or unjust sales for the same reason that they require consideration on contracts or require an offer and an acceptance, because it would not be right to do otherwise. It's not a political concept, it's a commutative concept. It would not be because of the interests of the whole order that you would abolish certain important modern institutions. You would rather do it because of justice between any two people. The order of justice between two people, remember we've referred to that previously as a different order. We've talked about justice as it relates to the common good, the general virtue of justice, and we've talked about the special virtue of justice, which relates to the relations between two people. Aquinas says usury is wrong because it is theft. It is wrong in the way theft is wrong. It is taking something that someone else has a right to. And because of that, restitution should be paid if you collect money through usury. Restitution is owed as a matter of right, not as a matter of politics. And this is an important thing to think about. Our arguments about what is right are a different order and can solve many of the problems that we oftentimes think have to be solved through politics. The order of right, the helping people understand what is right or wrong, has enormous consequences. But it is not a debate about consequences. It is a debate about what is an absolute true standard of justice. And our specialty as lawyers, we have no special insight into politics. Politics requires great knowledge of all of society and what's in its common good and what its people need and what the opportunities are. What we are trying to do is understand right. That's where we should put our special focus. And that's why we begin with classes like contracts, property, torts, civil procedure, because those things pertain to right. Okay? Great. Okay, let's hop right in to Aquinas' arguments. So you can see that if you think about usury to come, you can see why this is setting up the question on taking extra money for the return of a loan. So the question is it just to sell a thing for more than it's worth apart from any fraud? You're going to honestly tell somebody, the horse is worth $50, I want $100 for it. Do you know it's worth $50? I say, yes, I do. You say, nevertheless, I want $100. And the buyer says, sold, I will take it. Is that injustice? That's the question. And Aquinas says, well, you can consider this from two perspectives. You can consider the sale in itself, apart from anything that the parties' interests bring to it. Let's just consider the sale in itself. He says, buying and selling are established for the common advantage of both parties. That's the premise of the argument. Why do we have buying and selling? Is it for one party's advantage? Is it to privilege buyers? No. Is it to privilege sellers? No. We establish buying and selling for their common advantage. Okay? Fair enough premise? Everybody willing to go along with that for the sake of argument? And then he says, okay, if it pertains to common advantage, then obviously it shouldn't advantage one party over the other. If it's for their common advantage, then they should commonly benefit. If we're going to set up something for common advantage, it shouldn't be made in a way that biases things in favor of buyers or in favor of sellers. We don't like buyers more than we like sellers, or sellers more than we like buyers. We set up a system of exchange that is equal for their common advantage, not because we want to help buyers more than sellers or sellers more than buyers. Clever, okay, I'm following you, Aquinas. I'm with you. Are you all with me? He goes, therefore, there should be equality of the things exchanged in a purchase, something equal paid to the buyer, something equal received by the seller. Otherwise, one would get an advantage. It wouldn't be a common advantage. One would be elevated over the other. That's the argument. Okay? Why is it wrong, even if we both know the horse is worth $50, why is it wrong to sell a horse for $100? Because the nature of the institution was made for common advantage. Right? If it's for common advantage, one side should not benefit more than the other. Okay? If I sell the horse that's worth $50 and I receive $100, then I benefit more. That's not the purpose of the institution. Therefore, it shouldn't receive legal protection. In fact, if the buyer wants his $50 back, then he should get it. Make sense? Okay, that's it. This is an argument that goes, look, what is buying and selling about? It's an institution for the common advantage of both. In that context, obviously, even if both parties know it, it abuses the purpose of the system for one party to get more than the other. You see where this is going to go with usury? See where this is headed with usury? If I offer to loan you $1 million and I get back $1.5 million, it's the same as my horse example, arguably. Okay? You see where we're headed with this? But it could also affect many kinds of speculative buying and selling, where somebody sells under conditions of scarcity. He waits, he hoards something for a condition of scarcity, and then sells it for more than he's worth, knowing that the market is going to be restored soon after. He knows what it's worth, but he sells it for more. Okay? We all together on that? Now, next slide, please. There are a lot of ways you can attack this argument. And modern economic theory does attack the argument in many of these ways. You say buying and selling are set up for the common advantage of the parties. Maybe it's not set up for their common advantage. Maybe it's set up for their combined advantage. That is to say, this is what the economist Pareto would say. It's set up so that as long as the transaction benefits both of them in some way, then the transaction should go forward. It doesn't set up for their common advantage. It's set up for their combined advantage. As long as both parties are better off, then the transaction is justified, Pareto would say. Right? They don't have to have common advantage. It doesn't have to benefit them commonly. As long as it's to their combined advantage, then the transaction would be justified. Or maybe you would say, no, we set up buying and selling because we recognize that there's such a thing as property, and we recognize that if you own property, you can transfer that property. If you recognize that there's property and the right to transfer property, then you have recognized the right to transfer property on a condition. If you pay me $10, I'll give you my horse. It doesn't follow that we set up buying and selling because we wanted the common advantage of both parties. Kant would say, for example, no, we set up buying and selling because we recognize that there's property and we recognize individual freedom to alienate their property. So this is an interesting question. I mean, I think Aquinas is right. If buying and selling are set up for the common advantage, he's right. If buying and selling are not set up for the common advantage, then I think he's wrong. So this is a really important question. Economies before, say, the 16th century, the buying and selling were set up. They were instituted. This is just a historical comment of mine. You don't have to credit it, but I've looked at the issue. Economies were set up for the common advantage of buyer and seller. Today, economies aren't. Today, economies are set up to honor individual freedom, ownership. They may be set up for the combined advantage, but not for the common advantage. Maybe it's a choice. Maybe we've chosen one path, and there's another path that really was once chosen, and we've walked away from it. We have a question: which one is right? Which one is right? There are some other arguments you can raise against the other premises, but basically, it's the same kind of thing. The premises of modern thought about what we're doing in an economy are very different. What is the goal of an economy? Is it to supply our needs? Or is it to make our country strong so we can defeat our foes? Is it to make us all as rich as possible? Is it to make us as virtuous as possible? Should the rules of the economy be set up so that we become a more virtuous community? Or should the rules of an economy be set up so we become as rich an economy as we can? I think the United States is a very rich country. It's not clear to me that the United States is a more moral country. The U.S. has a higher GDP than Korea. I'm not sure that the Korean community, economic community, is not a more just and virtuous community than the U.S. economy. I'm not sure that it's better, but it's not obvious to me just because it has a smaller GDP that per capita, that it is a less good economy. I would want to look at other things. Aquinas' suggestion seems to me quite probable. Buying and selling should be for the purpose of the common advantage of the parties, not merely their combined advantage, or not merely for individual liberty. There's a greater value that could be there. And so I'm willing to grant him his premises and move on and see what else he draws from it, even though I recognize we could attack that in various ways. Okay, we all together? Great, next slide. So Aquinas now, he comes back at this same position. He's got another argument. And his second argument deals with sales in money, specifically. Money is a very complicated topic, by the way. Not just because we want it really badly, particularly when we go on dates. The most important time for a man to have money is when he goes on dates, in case you're wondering. Aquinas says money was instituted among men to provide a measure of value to things to facilitate exchange. No, money was instituted among men so they could take ladies on dates. That's why it's a common confusion. But anyway, even the best thinkers have their flaws. Now, seriously, money was instituted among men, Aquinas says, to provide a measure of value of things to facilitate exchange. This is why he says there was money. So this is a common story used to illustrate this. Suppose I make shoes. And I've made 1,000 shoes. And I would like to buy a steak for dinner. Unfortunately, I go to the seller of beef, and he has only a cow. And he says, I will take 1,000 shoes for your cow. And the only way I can get him to sell his cow to me is for 1,000 shoes. Well, that's a very inefficient way of getting steak, right? So what I do is I assign a measure of value, money. And I sell one pair of shoes for $20. And then I take that $20 to the cowman, the rancher, and I say, I would like one steak. And I give him that $20. And this way, we have a way of measuring out an equivalence of value, not merely thing to thing. One cow is worth 1,000 shoes, but we have an independent measure of value. So I can measure out the value of one pair of shoes and one steak. I have a way of facilitating exchange by dividing the value of things in various ways. And that's kind of a common story about where money arises from. This is the thinnest argument about money imaginable, okay? This is a very, very, just like the argument about why buying and selling is exchanged, what money is, why it's exchanged, whether its purpose evolves over time, incredibly important argument. But let's grant Aquinas' premise for the second. Money is instituted among men to provide a measure of value of things to facilitate exchange. If that's true, all we have to do is add the second premise. The money price for something for which something is sold or purchased is the measure of its value. Okay? Therefore, if the price given or taken is worth more or less than the thing that is purchased, there is inequality, injustice, and restitution should be given. So let's go over the argument again. It's very simple. Money is a measure of value of a thing. That's what it is. The price that's paid in a transaction is a measure of the value of a thing. So, if you pay more money for something than it's worth, then it's an injustice, because money is made so that you give the amount of money that something is worth. That's his argument. All right? And he reaches the same conclusion. The conclusion is, if you pay more than something is worth, that's an injustice. Why? Because money was meant to be a measure of the thing's value in exchange. So pay more or pay less, it's an injustice. Some remedy needs to be made. All right? Next slide. You can attack all of this in the same way. Maybe money wasn't instituted among men to provide a measure of value of things. Maybe money was instituted as a standard of the value of money. So what you do is you originally were trading gold for things, and people would get gold and they would go, is this really an ounce of gold? Does it weigh an ounce? Is it all gold? Is this 40 karat gold or is this 15 karat gold? Is this fool's gold? And so the government comes in and goes, okay, I'm going to weigh and measure gold. I'm going to put my stamp on it, and if anyone counterfeits this, it's a crime. So you can rely on this as a weight and a measure. In that case, money isn't supposed to be valuing things. Money is itself a pre-valued amount of gold, weighed and measured. Which is it? Great questions. Okay? But if Aquinas is right, I think his argument once again follows. I mentioned some other ways you can attack this argument up there as well. Next slide. Now Aquinas says, I admit that when we conduct sales transactions, I've been thinking of it just in terms of the relationship between the price that's paid and the thing which is purchased. But there is more to consider. So this is the next argument. You can consider a sale not only with respect to the things that are being exchanged, but also with respect to the parties and advantages or disadvantages. So he says sales may be considered not only with regard to the transaction itself, but also with respect to the advantageous or disadvantageous consequences to the party which are extraneous to the transaction. So I'm giving you $10 in return for $10 of steak. Right? Considered therein, there has to be perfect equality, he says. But when I give you the steak, maybe there are other consequences to me that have nothing to do with the transaction. And he asks, can we consider those? And he says, sure. Sales may be considered not only with regard to the transaction itself, but also with respect to advantages or disadvantages to the party. The consequence to the seller may include not only the loss of the item in the transaction, but other things extraneous to the sale. So, for example, you come to me and you say, I have a huge harvest this year on my huge lands. You have a very meager harvest and very small lands. I would like to buy your tractor so that I can harvest all of my fields. And I say, well, what do you think the tractor's worth? And you say $100. I say, great, I agree. Everybody agrees this tractor is worth $100. But I have a problem. If I sell you my tractor, you can harvest your lands, but I can't harvest my lands. That's why I own the tractor. In addition to losing the value of the tractor, which we agree is $100, I will also immediately be injured with respect to my ability to harvest my own lands. So the value of my harvest is $50. I will sell you the tractor. I will sell you the tractor for $100, which it's worth, plus the $50 that I'm going to lose, the cost of my disadvantage. And Aquinas says, sure. In such a case, a seller may justly demand a price for more than the thing is worth in itself because of the loss caused by the sale. But suppose I did this. Suppose I own a tractor and I have no farm. I just have a tractor. Maybe I sold my farm. Maybe I like tractors. Anyway, I've got a tractor. What business is it of yours why I have a tractor? Mind your own business. Suppose you come to me and you say, I would like to buy your tractor, and I have no loss. And I say, why would you like to buy my tractor? You say, because if I can't find a tractor, I'm not going to be able to harvest my fields. And I have a big field, lots of grain. I'm going to make $10,000 from the harvest. And I say, okay, I will sell you the tractor, but in addition to the $100 we agree it's worth, I want $1,000. I want a 1/10 share of the profits you're going to make. And the man says, why do I need to pay you $1,000? You're not going to lose $1,000. You don't have a farm. You're not losing anything. And I say, I know I'm not losing anything, but you're gaining something. I want a share of your gains. And Aquinas says, no, that's unjust. Because when you sell someone a tractor, your loss is your own. You really have the loss. It's yours. But the advantage belongs to the other person. You can't raise the price above the actual value of the thing because another person is going to be advantaged. Okay? That's the claim he makes. Why? Because sales are instituted for our common advantage. And so I can't use your need to extort part of your advantage back to me. The purpose of the sale is for us to reach a common advantage, for neither one of us to be burdened more than the other. If you compensate me for my loss, we have the same burdens. But if I take from your advantage, then I'm gaining something to which I do not have a just claim. Now, this is just a hair short of what goes on in usury. What goes on in usury is I sell someone a tractor, namely, I give them money. They're going to put it to some use and gain an advantage. And I say, beyond what I'm losing by giving you the money, I want a share in your profits. I want a share of what you're going to gain. So Aquinas says, first, it's wrong for selling things. And second, he's going to say, it's wrong in the case of usury as well. Okay? Everybody following along? Is this how sales are done today? No, it is not how sales are done today. Because today, we don't operate with the notion that things have a worth, or rather what we say is things are worth whatever the market says they're worth. We don't believe in the worth of things. Things are worth whatever you can sell them for. Now, there are some exceptions to that, which we'll note in a second. Okay, next slide. So question, Aquinas says, he says, it would seem that it is okay to sell something for more than it's worth because in civil law, you can do that. As long as you don't commit fraud, the rule is caveat emptor in his days. As long as you don't commit fraud, you can sell something for more than it's worth. Next slide. Now, this is a very important argument from Aquinas. This is not that germane to what we're doing today, but it's a very important thing to understand. Aquinas says, look, yes, human law allows you to do this. You can sell something for more than it's worth as long as you don't commit fraud. But, as I explained previously in the Treatise on Law, which we haven't read this semester, human law is given to people among whom there's a lack of virtue. It's not given to good people. It's not a measure of life just for good people. It's a measure of life for a few good people and lots of bad people. And so, human law cannot forbid everything that's unjust. It suffices for it to forbid as much as is unjust as is consistent with human flourishing and intercourse. If you banned everything that was unjust, what would happen is that everybody would be in jail. This isn't exactly the argument, but it's close to it. If everybody was punished who acted unjustly, then everybody would be in jail. So you have to decide what things are you going to punish. Some things that are unjust, the law properly should not bless by authorizing, but it should leave unpunished. And Aquinas says that's what happens in most of these kind of transactions. So the law says as long as you don't commit fraud, then the transaction will remain where it is, even if you sell unjustly. But, and this was the Roman law, if you sell something for 50% more than what it's worth, and afterwards you can show that you were grossly overcharged, in that case, Roman law said you should roll back the transaction and refund the overcharge. Okay? So he says, yeah, we don't prohibit it in all cases, but at extreme levels, we prohibit it. And until quite recently, by the way, that was the law with respect to usury. In the United States until quite recently, this is the law still in Korea and the United States today, there are limits on usury. Usury is allowed, but it's not allowed totally freely. There are limits on it. And we have a number of doctrines in commercial law which similarly put limits on profiteering through unjust sales of things, commercial impracticability, failure of purpose. These are examples which approximate this in some circumstances. And in the EU, they have strong rules in competition law on excessive pricing. So if you use your market power to price something excessively, then you can get a return on the excessive price. Next slide. He says, though, by contrast, although civil law is made for the unjust, God's law is given to us for the just. And while the law may not punish people who sell for more than something is worth, you should know that God cares about this. And you have a moral duty, even if you don't have a legal duty, to sell things only for what they're worth. Quite aside from the question of fraud, it's not enough not to defraud someone. You should only take what something is worth, and you should pay a buyer, or you should pay a seller what his product is worth, or you sin, Aquinas says. Interesting thing to consider. All right, next slide. Next, Aquinas considers a special kind of person who sells and buys goods. He calls him a tradesman. A tradesman. And a tradesman is somebody who buys and sells goods not for their use. Now remember, Aquinas says that the purpose of owning things is so that man can satisfy his needs. He can use them. Remember that? The reason it's okay for people to mess with stuff, remember after we talked about whether you can kill plants, Aquinas asked this great question. Why can human beings mess with inanimate things? Why can you mess with them? You can mess with them because God has given them to us for the satisfaction of our needs. The whole purpose of possession and property is so that we can satisfy our needs through use. Okay? The natural reason why we can have things and possess things and own them is so that we can satisfy our needs and use. So the basic natural way of relating to something is to eat wheat to drink water, to drive a car. But a tradesman buys wheat, or he buys water, or he buys cars, not to drive them or drink them or eat them. He buys them for another purpose, to sell them. He buys wheat, and then he sells wheat, but he never eats the wheat. He buys it not for its natural purpose, but to sell it. So a tradesman is one who transacts in goods for the further purpose of profiting in other transactions with the goods, rather than using them in the ways that make the goods useful. Aquinas says, a transaction in goods is inherently virtuous only if it serves the purpose of the goods to satisfy the natural needs of life. If you buy food to satisfy your need to eat, that is a virtuous act. That is good. If you buy water to drink it and satisfy your thirst, that's a good act. If you buy wheat for gluttony, that's bad. If you drink wine to drunkenness, that's bad, okay? What makes a transaction inherently virtuous is that you enter into it to satisfy your need for the use. So he concludes, a tradesman's industry, his transactions, are not inherently good. They are not good in themselves. That is, they have not yet satisfied the purpose for which we have mastery over things. They must be justified by whatever further purpose they have. So if a tradesman trades because he tries to support his household, that's good. Now it's a virtuous act. Or if he buys up grain to store up for his country in case of famine, like Joseph did in Egypt, that's good. But what makes it good is not inherent to it. When I go to the store and buy food for my family, inherently virtuous. But when a tradesman buys goods, whether it's right or wrong, it depends entirely on why he's doing it. So, Aquinas says, being a tradesman is very dangerous. Because if you seek profit from trade, there's no limit to it. If you're buying to eat, there's a natural limit. How much food can you eat? If you're buying to drink, there's a natural limit. How much can you drink? If you're buying out of greed, there is no limit, because you can gain an infinite amount of profits. Okay? Does that make sense? So, very clever argument, I think. Very powerful argument. Can you attack it? Sure you can. But it's a very good argument so far. So, next slide. So Aquinas says, look, it's got to be always unjust, not just neutral, but always unjust to trade, because in order to trade, you have to do what we just said in the previous question was wrongful. You have to buy something for less than it's worth and sell for more than it's worth. How can a trader make money? If I buy wheat at $1 a bushel and I sell it for a profit, then I either cheated on this first transaction by buying it for less than it was worth and selling it for what it was worth, or I cheated on this transaction by buying it for what it was worth over here and then selling it for more than it was worth. Which was it? Who did you swindle? You either bought it for too little or you sold it for too much. And he says, no. It's possible to buy low and sell high because you do something to the goods, and then it's justified. So he gives the example of transportation. If there's a lot of wheat in the United States, but very little wheat in, who has very little wheat? Who? Korea's got enough of everything. It's a cornucopia. It's a land of plenty, James. It's a sufficiency of everything. Okay, Korea doesn't have any cows. We'll take cows. Korea has some cows, I know. If I take cows from the United States, they put them on a boat, and they ship them across the ocean, and then I sell them in Korea where there are fewer cows. I've taken cows from where they're plentiful, we don't need cows, to where they're needful. So I would buy cows where there are too many, and a maximally disruptive way of conveying them. I would sell them where there are too few, and the value of the cows in Korea would be more. What do I get paid for? transportation. I bought the cows justly, I sold the cows justly, I get paid for transportation. I'm a tradesman, but not really. What I really am is a transporter. Or maybe there's a huge harvest of rice in Korea. Huge, gigantic. God blesses Korea. There's a huge harvest of rice, 10 times the amount of rice in a normal year. What are we going to do with all this rice? We can't keep the rice. It'll go bad. So I buy the rice and I put it in a warehouse. And then in the bad harvests that come, I dispense the rice year by year. What am I getting paid for? Warehousing the rice. I'm storing the rice. If I'd sold it in the year of the bountiful harvest, the price would be very low, but I wait until the rice is needed. I'm paid for warehousing the rice. Or, he says, also it could be safeguarding. There are risks, there are dangers to things. Maybe what I do is I safeguard them. Maybe rice has to be stored in a particular way. Maybe there's certain kind of dangers. I safeguard against them. And in those cases, if it's from transporting, warehousing, safeguarding, or something similar, it is perfectly appropriate for a tradesman to get more, a different price, than he originally paid. Notice what he's doing here is he's setting this up against what a usurer does. When he gives someone money, if he's not doing those kinds of things, then he shouldn't be able to get more money. This is anticipating the kinds of things that are going to differentiate a usurer, because a usurer, when he gives money, is not safeguarding, he's not warehousing, he's not guarding from danger. Okay? All right. The big show. We've got 10 minutes. This is the big show. This is the big payoff. Like if you hate banks and financial institutions charging all kinds of interest, which you shouldn't, but if you do, like this is your big chance to stick it to them with natural law arguments. Next slide. Whether usury, that is, taking money as a price for money lent, is unjust. I love this argument. It's a very, very fast argument. Very good. Very complicated subject, but Aquinas is going to take it on very fast. Given what we just talked about not being able to buy and sell for more than something's worth, he says, one may not sell what does not exist. You can't justly sell what does not exist. Because taking money for nothing creates an evident inequality between the price that is paid and the thing received. So remember we just said before, if I get paid more or less than the thing is worth, that's unjust. If I sell you nothing, how much money should I get? Nothing. If I sell you nothing and I get anything, it's obviously unjust, right? Can we all agree on that? Come on, Aquinas says, we can all agree on that, right? If I sell you nothing and I get something for it, that's got to be wrong, right? Okay. Second part of the argument. Selling money apart from its consumption, its use, is selling nothing. That's it. That's the argument. Selling money, if you sell money but say to somebody you can't use it, you're selling nothing. That's the argument. Therefore, if money is sold and the same returned, then there's justice. But if money is required to be returned in addition to the loan, then something has been paid for nothing. That's the argument. You follow it? We all agree you can't pay something for nothing. Here's the tricky part of the argument. If you sell someone money, but say they can't use it, you're selling them nothing. Now, what does Aquinas mean by that? Well, if you read the argument, this is the longest part of the argument. It's a quite involved argument. But Aquinas says, look, in law, we recognize two types of things. We recognize things which, if you sell them, you can sell the usufruct separately from the thing itself. And things where if you sell them, you sell the consumption of the thing. So if I sell land, I can sell the use of the land separately from the land itself. I can divide the interest. I can offer you to rent my house. I can offer you to farm my land. I can sell that to you. I can say, you may farm my land for a year, but you don't own the land. But there are some things when I sell them, by nature, I have to sell not only the thing, the use of the thing, but the entire thing itself, because to use it is to consume it. So, bread. If I sell you bread, I have to sell you the whole thing, because the only use of bread is to eat it. There's nothing left over. You eat it, it's eaten. If I sell you wine, the same way. Aquinas says we can't imagine, because it's impossible, someone to sell bread but not sell the use of the bread. Imagine if I said to you, you come into my bakery and you say, I'd like to buy some bread. And I say, I'll sell you this loaf of bread, but not the use of it. You can't have the use of it. For the use of it, you have to pay twice as much. So we agree the bread is worth $5. It's good bread, right? And I say, okay, give me the $5. I hand over the bread and I say, but you can't eat it. You say, what? I can't eat it? I say, no, the use of the bread is extra. You own the bread, but you can't use it. Well, Aquinas says that's crazy. To sell someone bread but not sell them the use of the bread, that's insane. Because the use of the bread cannot be distinguished from the bread itself as far as its use is concerned, because to use it is to destroy it. Unlike buildings, unlike land, unlike other things. And therefore the law has always distinguished between certain things which have to be sold altogether, or things which can be sold separately, the ownership and the benefit, the use of the land. All right? So he says, if you sell someone a loaf of bread, but you don't give them the right to eat it, benefit from it, grow strong from it, if you sell someone wine, but you say you can't quench your thirst with it, you have sold them nothing. You have sold them nothing. Because the whole use of bread and wine is in the consumption. And here's the controversial part. Aquinas says money is the same way. If you give someone money, the only use of money, like bread or wine, is in the spending of it, in the destruction of it, in the giving it over to another person. There's no other use for money. Okay? That's the argument. So, let's run through it again. You can't sell what does not exist, because it's obviously unjust to take something for nothing. If you sell money apart from its consumption, you sell what does not exist, because there is nothing, like with bread and wine, with money apart from its consumption. The only thing you can do with money is consume it. So, if you sell money and you require more, you are selling something for nothing. Another way of putting this is it's the same thing as when Aquinas said, when I am selling something for what it's worth, I can consider my own disadvantage, but I can't sell it for your advantage. And what the usurer is doing is he's making you pay a share of what you're going to do with the money. And Aquinas says, just as in the case of selling an object, I can't raise my tractor price because you're going to make a good use of the tractor. I can't raise the price of the loan because you're going to put the money to good use. I don't have those things. You have them. They belong to you. I'm selling you nothing. And that's inherently unjust. Okay? Complicated argument, but it's right there. Very basic, very simple. You can't sell nothing. There is nothing in money except the consumption of it. Therefore, to sell the consumption and the price twice of money is to sell nothing. All right? Very good. Next slide. And he has the same point about the civil laws. Civil laws allow usury. Why do the civil laws allow usury? Same reason they allow you to sell something for more than it's worth. But even the law recognizes, the Roman law he's speaking of here, recognizes that usury is a special case. It's not a true usufruct under Roman law. The Roman law called it a quasi-usufruct. And so it didn't allow usury on the same terms that it allowed people to sell the rental of a property or the rental of the field. It specifically limited the amount. Why? Because it considered it unjust. Not as a matter of social policy, as a matter of right. Next slide. Now, this is a very important question because it asks us whether or not this is universally true. Aquinas considers the objection. Anyone may lawfully accept a thing which its owner freely gives him. Now, he who accepts the loan freely gives the usury. Therefore, he who lends may lawfully take the usury. So this is a common refrain in Aquinas. He says, look, if you consent to a tort, it's not a tort. There's no injury to one who consents. So basically, another way of framing this is the person who takes the loan consents. Suppose it's a wrong. Suppose it's an injury. He consents to the injury. So where's the harm? There's no damage. And this is one of the most controversial aspects that divides thinkers about usury. Aquinas responds, he who gives usury, that is, who pays the interest, does not give it voluntarily simply, but under a certain necessity, insofar as he needs to borrow money, which the owner is unwilling to lend without usury. So this is a very, very, very interesting question. Usually we don't consider the kinds of needs where people borrow money to be the kinds of coercive acts that render their consent invalid. Like I go to work every day. I go to work every day because I love you guys. But some people go to work every day because they need money. Does that mean they don't consent to go to work? No. But kinda. It's a different thing the way I come to work every day with joy, clicking my heels, singing, dancing, and the way a lot of people go to work. And you can imagine a very, 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 very poor person who is about to starve to death, who if he was offered work would have to take it rather than die, and we might say he doesn't consent at all. And Aquinas puts this on a spectrum. Aquinas thinks in the case of usury, we should be troubled by the way in which obviously very, very poor people are coerced into taking loans. And this is actually, turns out to be Calvin's position. Calvin thinks that the scriptures, in the case of justice in this case, distinguishes usury in the case of a poor person who's going to die if he doesn't get money and takes a loan with high interest rate. And imagine a business, Korean business wants to expand into China. It's making a lot of money. It's doing just fine in Korea, but it thinks it could increase its profits 10% if it expanded into China. It goes to a bank and gets a loan, right? Is that business coerced into paying interest? Not in the same sense as a poor man who would die if he doesn't receive a loan. The motivation of the anti-usury position among Christians is the Bible contains some very strong witnesses against usury. There are prohibitions in the scriptures on the taking of usury. Jesus in Luke 6 talks about how you should give even without an expectation of receiving. The Bible in Ezekiel and other places describes people who make their life through the work of others, through usury, as sinners, deserving judgment. And so there's a big question here. Aquinas says usury is wrong as a matter of right. Calvin says usury is wrong not as a matter of fundamental right. It's wrong when it's applied to some people and not others. It's not wrong as a transaction, as Aquinas says, because you're selling something, you're selling nothing and getting something. He says it's wrong because it exploits the poor. In the United States, this position was the basic position since the beginning of the country. Interest rates were held down as a protection for the poor and to suppress the industry of professional usury. So it didn't get too profitable, so it didn't suck away too much industry, and rather people worked on making things and making money from making things rather than giving loans to each other. Since then, the United States law has changed because, you remember we talked about Bentham before? Bentham, everybody hated Bentham, okay? Because he was an odious guy. Really smart, but really odious. So he had to go to Russia. I know, we're running out of time. He had to go to Russia, and when he was out in Russia, because the Russians could get along with him, I love the Russians, he wrote a book in defense of usury. And his arguments have basically been accepted, which is, as long as two people can agree on a contract freely, they should be able to set usury rates at whatever they want. And we've gone from a world where almost throughout the Western world, 12% was the highest imaginable interest rate, to today the average interest rate in the United States is 30% on credit cards. It's fantastically high. I know the rate isn't quite as high in Korea, but on credit card debt in Korea, I think it's very high as well. And lest you think you're not involved in this, remember, when you give money to a bank and you get interest back, what is that interest back you're getting from the bank? Usury. All of us who are in this system are complicit to one degree or another. When you give money to the bank, you're giving them money, and without doing any work, you're getting something back. Just to conclude, Aquinas thinks there are cases where you can take interest, where you are going to be damaged by the loan, as we discussed before, where instead of giving someone a loan, you form a business relationship with them. If a bank wants to give someone money and be a partner, they can do that. Later, after Aquinas, a lot of people talked about how if you have an expectation of specific gain, you can charge interest on the gain that you are going to lose. After Aquinas, for the next 300 years, people were having increasingly technical arguments on this until you get to the modern position, which is basically there should be limits on usury, but there are many circumstances where usury is appropriate, especially the business wants to advance in China kind of loans where there's no pressure, there's no oppression of the poor. But today we have lost the language to be able to have this discussion. And I think these kind of arguments are a very useful way for us to regain some of that language by thinking about what exactly it's doing that makes it right, not politically right, right as a matter of justice to engage in these kinds of transactions at all. I'm only 5 minutes over, so thank you very much for your attention.